This is part 1 of the GS paper 1 history marathon, and it covers art and architecture from the painted rock shelters to the heritage argument going on this year. 10 chapters, about 4 hours, 18 past questions anchored to specific scenes. Start with why this part is worth 4 hours. Because it is a fair question and there is a number that answers it. Across the last 9 years of General Studies Paper 1 in Mains, that is art and architecture is the second largest theme in the paper. Only modern India is bigger. It is not a decorative corner of the syllabus that you read the week before the examination. Across that period, roughly one question in 5 comes from this area. And here is the thing about those questions that most preparation misses. And read them, go and read them, not the topics, the verbs, like critically evaluate, to what extent, elucidate, how do you justify the view that, and comment. The examiner almost never asks you to describe a monument. He hands you a claim about one and asks you to weigh it. Sometimes he hands you a claim that is half wrong on purpose, and the marks are in noticing which half. So that is what this part is built to do. Every chapter takes the questions that have actually been asked and works backwards from them. What is the claim? What is the evidence? What does the evidence prove? Where does it stop proving? And what can you actually write in 150 words? So this is the what we are going to discuss in this part as far as art and architecture volume number 1 is concerned. Then how it is built and what it is not. Four things repeated every chapter, and it is worth knowing them before the first one starts. The first thing is every chapter is organized around a paradox or a tension, not a summary. A question the chapter then works out, organize around, not opens on. Chapter 1 opens on a past question, and chapter 5 on vocabulary, and the promise should describe what the chapters do rather than a formula they do not all follow. So, the most sophisticated drains in the ancient world, built by people who raised no monument to any king, an architecture wary of sacred figuration, transformed in India by a civilization with one of the world's richest sculptural traditions. If you remember nothing else from a chapter, remember its paradox. It is the sentence that turns an answer into an argument. Then second one comes to the second one. The past questions are read out word for word. When you hear one, write it down. The exact wording is the instruction. And many otherwise good answers lost marks because the candidate answered the topic and not the verb. So third one, every scene closes with a modal sentence on the screen. Screenshot it. It is written to be transplanted into an answer more or less as it stands. The fourth one is every chapter ends with a page called say it this way, not that way. These are all the specific errors that get marked wrong. The ones about which century, which queen, which wheel on the which pillar, they are on the screen and they are worth more than they look. So now what this part is not, because that matters too. It is not a list of monuments. You already have those. And list does not answer any question in the corpus. It is not current affairs. This is worth saying out loud. So across 13 years and 18 questions, exactly two are written in the present tense. The 2018 assertion that safeguarding our art heritage is the need of the moment, and the 2014 question about inputs to present day urbanization. The second one is 2 of 18. So the news supplies you with examples and anchors, a recent inscription, a returned bronze, a restoration argument, and it does not supply you with question topics. Every chapter here still ends in the present tense because the closing paragraph is where those examples belong, not in the middle of answer about the cholas, and it is not evenly weighted deliberately. And chapter 5 on the temple carries 5 past questions in its own, more than any other chapter in GS paper 1 history. 2 chapters, Indo-Islamic architecture and Indian painting, carry none at all. They are in here at full length anyway, and chapter 7 explains why in its own first minute. The short version, those two are the largest silences in the largest theme in the paper, and a silence that size does not last. One last thing before we start, you will hear me qualify a lot. That is a reading, not a finding. That is not hedging. That is the difference between an answer that scores and an answer that a well read examiner can knock over in one line. The candidate who knows where the evidence stops is writing at a different level from the candidate who does not. And in a paper full of assertions, full of assertions handed you to for evaluation, that is the whole game. 10 chapters, 18 questions, 4 hours. The examiner will not ask you what the cholas built. He will hand you a sentence about it and ask whether it is true. It is true. So till now we discuss what this part is. The examiner almost never asks you to describe a monument. He hands you claim and he asks you to weight it. So then what we discussed, and 4 things. That is first one paradox, and second one verbatim questions like critically evaluate, trace the light, discuss, etc. And then modal sentence. Every scene closes with one on screen. You can screenshot it. It transplants into an answer as it stands. And then say it this way. Every chapter ends on the errors that get marked, which century, which queen, and which wheel. And this is the chapter number 1 we are going to discuss. What is the chapter number 1? Rock shelter, rock shelters to grid cities. What is rock shelters to grid cities? That is Mesolithic art, Harappan buildings, and the megaliths. So this is GS paper 1 history marathon part 1 art and architecture. So what we are going to discuss is the oldest pictures in India. What are the oldest pictures in India? Here is the 2015 question. 200 words, 12.5 marks. Mesolithic rock cut architecture of India not only reflects the cultural life of the times, but also a fine aesthetic sense comparable to modern painting. Critically evaluate this comment. Critically. So you have to start by noticing the examiner's own wording because it tells you what to write. Because it tells you what to write. These are the webs. The question says rock cut architecture. What it is describing is rock cut art, rock art, painting on the walls of natural shelters, not excavated architecture at all. So do not correct the examiner in your answer. Simply write about the paintings. About the paintings, which is unmistakably what is meant. But notice that the question contains 2 claims and critically evaluate and critically evaluate. Means you will support one and qualify the other. What is the claim one? The paintings reflect the cultural life of the times. Support this fully. It is true and it is well evidenced. Bimbetka in Raisin district of Madhya Pradesh is the anchor, a complex of several hundred rock shelters, a large proportion of them painted, brought to scholarly notice by V.S. Pakankar in the 1950s and inscribed by UNESCO in 2003. And alongside it, and worth naming because it extends the map northward, the Lakudiyar in Uttarakhand on the Suyal River, with its distinctive stick-like human figures and hand-linked dancing rows. So then comes to the Mesolithic layer. Mesolithic layer. Mesolithic layer is the most abundant, and what is shown is a way of life. Animals dominate: deer, bison, boar, elephant, rhinoceros, tiger. Human figures are small, linear, almost stick-like, and shown in action, hunting in coordinated groups with bows, barbed spears, traps and snares, honey collection from cliffs, communal dancing in rows, domestic scenes. That is a documentary record of subsistence, technology, and social organization produced by people who left almost no other record of their cultural life at all, and produced across a span so long that the paintings overlay one another in layers, sometimes made deep, which is how their relative technology established it all. One fact about the matter, one fact about the materials, and one only. The pigments were minerals: hematite, limestone, and kaolin, charcoal, and manganese, copper bearing stone. That matters here for a single reason. Mineral pigments are chemically stable, which is why this painting survived and almost nothing else from the period did. So, and note that discovery is ongoing. Newly reported prehistoric paintings in the Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu, and the rock art sites of the Chambal Valley now on India's UNESCO tentative list. This is not a closed field. This is not a closed field and a claim to a fine aesthetic scene comparable to modern painting. Here you qualify, and this is where the marks are. Concede what is true. There is a real formal resemblance. These artists used economy of line, a running deer conveyed in four strokes. In four strokes, they used abstraction and stylization rather than realism for the human figure. So they composed with movement across a surface. Some sites use an X-ray convention showing internal organs, which a 20th century viewer reads as strikingly modernist. 20th century artists themselves noticed this, and the comparison was made by them before it was made by examiners. So now you have to contest it in three moves. The first one is the comparison is anchor anachronistic. Modern painting is an art of individual expression, made of exhibition, signed, made for exhibition, signed, and produced in a self-conscious tradition that defines itself against earlier art. Prehistoric rock art, prehistoric rock art has none of these properties. To call it comparable to modern painting is to judge by a standard invented 30,000 years later. So the second one is the function was almost certainly not aesthetic. The dominant scholarly readings are ritual, magical or communicative, sympathetic, hunting magic, initiation, territorial marking, the transmission of knowledge about animals and hunting technique to the young. The shelters were lived in. These are working walls, not gallery walls. The third one is, and this is the strongest objection The superimposition itself refutes the claim. If these were valued as finished aesthetic objects, latter painters would not have painted straight over earlier work. They did repeatedly for millennia. The act mattered more than artifact. Then give the balanced verdict, because they asked in the question asked critically evaluate. So the first half of the comment is sound. Rock art is rock art is our earliest and often our only evidence for Mesolithic cultural life. The second half is a defensible observation about form and misleading claim about intent. These artists possessed a genuine skill in line, the movement, and the composition that is visible and not in dispute, but calling that a fine aesthetic sense compared to modern painting. So you have to read our own categories backward into a body of work that was made to be something not to be looked at. This is the answer of our 2015 question. So in this, what we discussed so far, had this been valued as finished aesthetic objects, latter hands would not have painted over them. Had this been valued as what? Finished aesthetic objects, latter hands would not have painted over them. Superimposition is the decisive objection, and it is the best move for the chapter. And Bimbetka is resin district, Wakankar, Lakdwihar. These are pigments or mineral, which is why they survived. And we discussed going to the second thing, that is second question. This is asked in 2025. What the Harappans built? What the Harappans built? Here is the 2025 question. This is 2025 question asked in 2025. 150 words, 10 markers. The question is actually discuss the salient features of the Harappan architecture. This is the most straightforward question in the entire chapter and the easier to answer badly, because at 150 words, a list of 8 features scores less than 5 features with the reasoning attached. So you have to give 5, you can give 5 in this order. The first one is grid planning. Grid planning. Streets laid at right angles and a cardinal orientation, dividing the settlement into rectangular blocks, best seen at Mohenjo-daro and Kalibangan. This is deliberately layout proceedings construction. The plan came first and the houses were fitted into. So this is regarding grid planning. Streets laid at right angles and cardinal orientation, dividing the settlement into rectangular blocks, best seen at Mohenjo-daro and Kalibangan. This is deliberate layout preceding construction. The plan came first and the house were fitted into. The second one is the citadel and the lower town division. Citadel and lower town division. That is zoning. A raised western citadel carrying public structures and the eastern lower town residences. Western citadel carrying public structures and eastern lower town residences. At Dholavira in Gujarat, UNESCO inscribed in 2021 and the first Indus site in India to be listed, the division is uniquely threefold. What are the threefold? The citadel, middle town, and lower town. Functional zoning is Harappan, not modern. And third one is the standardized burnt brick. What is the standard burnt brick? What is standardized burnt brick? Clean fired brick into a consistent ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, 1 to 2 and 1 to 2, ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, thickness, width, length. And here is the 1 to 1 to 2 to 4, 1 to 2 to 4. So clinfied brick in a consistent ratio and thickness, width, length. And here is the fact that carries the answer. The ratio holds across the entire civilization over a territory of well over a million square kilometers. Standardization on that scale without any evident enforcing authority is the Harappan signature. Then fourth one is water and drainage. What is regarding water and drainage here? And this is the where the answer should spend most of these words, its words, because it is the feature of the Harappans genuinely led the ancient world in. Covered drains ran along the streets, individual houses connected to them, bathrooms in nearly every house, wastewater carried out through a chute into the street drain, soak pits collected solids, inspection openings allowed cleaning, and Mohenjo-daro had hundreds of wells and the water engineering scales beyond drainage. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, a sunken tank, made watertight with a double brick wall and a bitumen layer. Dholavira's reservoirs cut into rock in series, catching and storing runoff from seasonal streams in an arid landscape. Then comes to Lothal's basin, generally interpreted as dockyard, with an inlet channel and a spillway to regulate tidal water, excavated in the latter 1950s, dating to around 2400 BCE, and now the site of the National Maritime Heritage Complex. And next, fifth one, domestic architecture as evidence of priorities. Courtyard centered houses, staircases implying upper stories, private wells, and windowless walls facing the street. The house turns inward. Privacy was designed for. And one line on Harappan art, that is, because you will need it two chapters from now. The same civilization produced the small bronze figure from Mohenjo-daro, conventionally called the dancing girl, about 10.5 centimeters, cast by the last wax method. We build the technique in chapter number 3. So you have to note here only that it existed at the very beginning of Indian urban civilization. Now the feature defined by the absence which is in scene 3 and which you should flag here in a single sentence. No temples, no palaces, no royal tombs, and no monumental statuary here. So this is all regarding Harappan art. So the cities with the no kings. What is the scene number 3? That is now the argument that makes this chapter coherent, and it is has never been asked. So one side we are going to discuss, that is total standardization, a brick ratio held constant across a territory larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, a weights system in binary and decimal multiples, and stone cubes so accurate that they are interchangeable between cities 1,000 kilometers apart, a single script used from Gujarat to the Punjab, town plans that repeat, drainage that repeats, and on the other side, zero monumentality. What is monumentality? As far as Harappan culture is concerned, nothing monumental at all. No temple has been securely identified, no palace, no royal tomb, no throne, no colossal ruler statue, and no triumphal relief, no inscription naming a king, no image of a battle. So if you we set this side by side, you have the deepest puzzle in Indian archaeology. The uniformity implies an authority. What is this uniformity? That is total standardization here. Then comes to the archaeology shows no authority. Compared it with the contemporaries, because that is what makes the point land. Egypt built the pyramids for its rulers. Mesopotamia built ziggurats for its gods, and left king lists the royal inscriptions. Both spent their surplus on making power visible and permanent. But comes to the Harappans spent theirs on drains, whatever authority coordinated brick sizes across a million square kilometer did not commemorate itself, and that looks like a choice rather than a absence of capability. A civilization that could waterproof a tank with bitumen could certainly have carved a king. So you have to say plainly what we do not know, because that is what strong answer does. The script remains undeciphered, something over 4,000 inscribed objects survive, most of them very short, a few signs on a seal. We do not know the language beneath it. We therefore do not know what the Harappans called themselves, how they were governed, what they believed, or what any of their own words meant. At Dolavira comes to Dolavira, a sequence of 10 large signs was found that may have stood above a gateway, possibly the earliest signboard, in the world. At Dolavira, a sequence of 10 large signs was found that may have stood above a gateway. A gateway, possibly the earliest signboard in the world. We cannot read it. So state the paradox in the form of students you should carry into your answer. So we know more about Harappan plumbing than about Harappan politics. And that is not an accident of preservation. It is a reflection of what they chose to build. So this is going to be one line of honest calibration. Absence of evidence is not proof of absence. Much of Mohenjo-daro remains unexcavated. The water table has risen over the earliest levels, and some structures, Wheeler's granary, the Great Bath itself carry interpretations that are debated rather than settled. So you have to state the pattern, do not overclaim it as proven egalitarianism. So the next thing we are moving to do, we moving, that is scene number 4. What actually carries forward? Substantial in precedent and negligible in inheritance. This is the 2014 question. 150 words, 10 marks. To what extent has the urban planning and culture of the Indus Valley Civilization provided inputs to the present day urbanization? Discuss. This is the actual question was asked in 2014 for 10 marker question, 150 words. To what extent? To what extent is the whole question. Answer it in two halves. What genuinely transfers and the honest limit. And the limit is what separates a good answers from a routine one. The first half is four principles that do transfer. That is what transfers. What are the four principles? The first one is sanitation designed before settlement, not after. Sanitation designed before settlement, not after. The Harappans connected individual households to a covered trunk drain. That is precisely what large parts of urban India still have not achieved. 4,500 years later, the relevant point is not the technique, it is the sequencing. They built the drain first and fitted the house to it. The second one is functional zoning, that is citadel, middle town and lower town at Dolavira is a master plan with separated land use, which is exactly what a modern development plan attempts. The third one is decentralized water harvesting. What is decentralized water harvesting here? Dolavira sustained a city in an arid landscape and captured seasonal runoff stored in rock cut reservoirs. So set that against the water stress of Indian societies, contemporary Indian cities, and the relevance is immediate. not as a technology to copy, but as a proof that arid zone urbanism is scale is possible when storage is designed in from the start. The fourth one is standardization of materials and measures, which is the precondition for building at scale and to specification. Their brick ratio and weight system are an ancient equivalent of a building code. This is all regarding first half, that is what transfers for now, and second one is what does not. And this is part almost nobody's writes. The honest answer is to what extent is as precedent substantially as inheritance hardly at all. As precedent substantially as inheritance hardly at all. Harappan urbanism collapsed and urban life on the subcontinent did not resume for well over a millennium. Measure it from the mature phase and say that you are the mature Harappans ends around 1900 BCE. The de-urbanized late Harappan runs on for centuries after it. And cities return in the Ganga Valley only from around the 6th century BCE. And when cities did return, and they did not use Harappan grid planning, Harappan brick, standards of Harappan drainage. There is no chain of transmission. The knowledge was lost, and it was lost so completely that the civilization itself was unknown until the 1920s. Every input we now speak of was recovered by archaeology within the last 100 years. So modern Indian planning did not inherit Mohenjo-daro. It read about it at the scale objection, which is fair and which examiners reward. Harappan cities held populations in the tens of thousands. Indian cities today hold tens of millions. A gravity fed brick drain does not scale by a factor of 1,000. What scales is the principle. Sanitation as a design premise rather than a retrofit, not the engineering, not the engineering. Then you can close with the balanced verdict. The Indus contribution to present day urbanization is inspirational and evidentiary rather than genetic. It supplies proof that planned, sanitized, water secure urbanism is achievable and was achieved very early. It does not supply a technique we inherited or a tradition we continued. It is real value today is an argument that the order in which a city is built determines what it can become. And that argument is worth more than any of its specific devices. Then we are moving to next scene, that is the other architecture before the temple. What is the other architecture? One more body of building precedes the temple and it has never been asked about, which is a reason to know it rather than a reason to skip it. After Harappan collapse and before the historic period, the peninsula and the eastern uplands carry an extensive megalithic tradition. Iron Age, broadly the last millennium BCE into the early centuries CE. So, what are the farms? Name the farms here. Men- Menhirs, single standing stones, dolmens, chambers of upright slabs under a capstone, stone circles and cairns, burial slabs, and in the laterite country of Kerala and coastal Karnataka. Rock cut chambers excavated downward into soft laterite with a narrow shaft, a circular inner chamber and a ceiling slab. A ceiling slab known locally Muniara, the hermit's cell, and by names like Nidikuli, the treasure pit associated above ground with Kudakallu, umbrella stones, and Toppikallu, capstones. The function was chiefly funerary and specifically secondary burial. The bones of the dead collected after exposure and placed in the chamber with grave goods, pottery, iron tools, beds, beards, which tells you incidentally the iron working was established. Not all of them are tombs. Some served as commemorative markers, some as boundary stones, and some are aligned to solstice and equinox sunrise, functioning as calendars. And now the point that makes this scene worth is its minutes. How? In Jharkhand, in the Ranchi Kunti belt and around Hazaribagh, among Munda, Hoaron, and Asur communities, megalithism is not extinct. Communities still place new memorial stones for their ancestors using the same forms and local names, Sasandiri for the family dolmen type burial, Birdiri for memorial menhir. Villages maintain dedicated burial grounds. So these are not ruins with old stones. They are layered landscapes. Old stones and new stones in the same ground added across generations. That is globally rare and it is the strongest. It is the it is the strongest then and now available anywhere in this part. In most of the world, megaliths are archaeology. In parts of India, they are still furniture on ongoing practices. So you have to say what follows for conservation because it is the examinable consequence. You cannot protect a living megalithic site the way you protect a dead one. Fencing it and prohibiting additions would preserve the stones and end the tradition that produced them, which is precisely tangible versus intangible problem, which we are going to discuss in chapter number takes up. So, how it ended, and why that is a current question. So we have to close with the newest material in this part and with the reason it matters. For most of the 20th century, students were taught that Indus cities fell into invaders. That explanation has been abandoned. And you should be able to say why. There are no mass graves, no burnt cities, no destruction layers of the kind warfare leaves, and the society shows remarkably little militarization overall. The archaeology does not support a violent end. What replaced is a climate account and it has recently been sharpened. So name the study because you will be asked and because naming it is the answer writing lesson. In late 2025, a team of IIT Gandhinagar and the University of Colorado Boulder published in Communications, Earth and Environment a paper called River Drought Forcing the Harappan Metamorphosis. Solanki, Mishra, and climate model simulations with cave stalagmite, geochemistry, and lake water level records from the northwest India. So hold on the title for a second because it is doing work. The others did not call it a collapse, they called it a metamorphosis. They called it a what? Metamorphosis. And that word is the argument this scene is about to make. The reconstruction finds four prolonged drought phases between roughly 2425 and 1400 BCE, each lasting over 85 years, with the most severe peaking around 1733 BCE and running about 160 years. For that severest episode, the paper puts the rainfall shortfall at around 13% across nearly the whole region. Behind them on the behind them on that reconstruction, shift in the tropical Pacific, a cool La Nina like state that has sustained a strong monsoon through the mature phase gives way to a warmer regime, and rainfall and river flows fall across the Indus basin. So two disciplines of delivery here. You have to say on this reconstruction, these are modeled figures from one study, not settled consensus, and a candidate who attributes them is demonstrating exactly the judgment the examiner is looking for. And do not say drought caused the decline on its own. The authors themselves are careful. Prolonged water stress interacted with food shortage and social strain. Monocasual climate explanations are the new version of the invasion story, and they will age the same way. So you have to read the figures again as the civilization's own lifespan. The mature Harappan phase runs roughly 7 centuries. One drought episode alone consumed close a quarter of it. And watch what the shows. Archaeology shows. Archaeology shows people doing in response, because this is the human. This is the human, and the interesting part. They adapted. Water hungry wheat and barley give way to drought resistant millets. So settlements shift eastward and southward to what more reliable water, trade diversify, but the surplus that had supported large cities shrank. Long distance trade thinned as river navigation failed, urban crafts lost their market, drains went uncleaned, and public buildings were built over. So it was not a collapse, it was a slow de-urbanization. Over centuries, under sustained hydrological stress, a metamorphosis in others' own word. Now say why this belongs in a 2026 lecture. You have to say the best planned, best drained, most water conscious cities of the ancient world were undone not by an enemy but by rainfall. That is a finding produced in a century that is itself arguing about climate and urban water security. And it converts the Indus Valley from a chapter about brick sizes into a case study that any question on heritage urbanization or climate resilience can reach for. And the record is still being extended. Rakhigarh in Haryana, and the largest Harappan site in India, has had further mounds brought under protection and countries and continues to be excavated. Lothal is becoming the National Maritime Heritage Complex. The Harappan chapter is not closed, it is being actively rewritten. So they built the drain before the house, and it was not enough. What ended the best planned cities of the ancient world was not an army. Was not an army, it was the rain not coming. So then we are moving to the most probable questions for 2026 as far as this chapter is concerned. The first one is Harappan water management offers instructive precedents for contemporary urban India. Harappan water management offers instructive precedents for contemporary urban India. Examine 250 words 15 marker question. Discuss the megalithic burial traditions of India and their value as historical evidence. 150 words 10 marker. The Indus Valley Civilization is defined as much by what it did not build as by what it did. Comment. This is 150 words 10 marker question. So you have to say it this way. We discussed so far, not that way. Do not say what the Indus cities were destroyed by Aryan invaders. Bimbetka is Mesolithic. The Gaggar Hakra is the Saraswati. Elsewhere in the world, megaliths are archaeology. Rainfall fell by 10 to 20%. Do not say like this, but you have to say instead this. The invention explained is abandoned. No mass graves. Why? Because no mass graves, no burnt cities, no destruction layers, prolonged drought, and gradual de-urbanization is reason. And a sequence from the upper Paleolithic onward, the Mesolithic lower is the most abundant. And an identification what? An identification many accepts, which remains debated. In most of the world, living traditions survive at Samba in parts of Madagascar. About 13% of several severest episodes on the paper's own figure from IIT paper. And then we are moving to chapter number 2, that is the Buddhist centuries, stupa and rock cut. What is the Buddhist century stupa and rock cut? Rock cut caves, rock cut structures. A grave that became a diagram. What is the grave that became a diagram? That is stupa. The stupa did not begin as Buddhist architecture. It began as a burial mound. The tumulus, a form older than the religion and common across the ancient world. Tumulus. What made it Buddhist was a specific event. After the parinirvana, the relics were divided and distributed among claimants, and mounds were raised over them. Tradition holds that Ashoka later gathered and redistributed those relics into stupas across the subcontinent. Now name the parts and name them correctly, because half the marks in any stupa question sit in the vocabulary. What is that vocabulary? What is that vocabulary? The Medi. The first one is Medi. What is Medi? The drum, a raised circular base. Then second one is Anda, the hemispherical dome. The word means egg, and that is not incidental. Then the Harmika, the square railed enclosure sitting on the top of the dome. And Yesti, the mast rising from the Harmika through the center. The Chatravali, the tide umbrellas on the mast, conventionally three. And the Vedika, the railing that encloses the whole. And the Pradakshina Patha, the circumambulatory path between railing and dome, dome walked clockwise. Larger stupas have a second path raised on the Medi. And the Toranas, the gateways at the four cardinal points. Now, what it means, because a stupa question that only names parts score half. The Anda is the cosmic egg, the world, the Yasti is the axis Monday, the world axis running through it. The Chatravali marks the heavens stacked above, and the three umbrellas are read as the Triratnas. What are the Triratnas? The Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. The Harmika is the abode at the summit of world axis. So the pilgrim walking the Pradakshina Pada is not walking around a grave, is walking around a model of the universes with the relics at its center. And the act of walking clockwise is itself the ritual. So that is not the transformation. So that is the transformation. A mound over bones became a became a diagram of the cosmos that you enter by walking. So one structural note for latter, in the Andhra country, the farm acquires a distinctive addition. What is that? The Ayaka pillars, sets of five on projecting platforms at cardinal points, that is Amaravati and belongs to chapter number 3. So this is all about stupa, that is part by part. First one, Medi, Anda, Harmika, Yasti Chatravali, Vedika, and Torana, Pradikshina Pada, etc. And we are going to see number 2, that is we are going to discuss folk motifs, Buddhist ideals. This is the 2016 question, 200 words and 12.5 markers, 5 marker question. What is that question? Early Buddhist stupa art, while depicting folk motifs and narratives, successfully expounds Buddhist ideals. Elucidate. Elucidate. The question asking is elucidate. What is meant by elucidate? Elucidate means make it clear. The examiner has given a tension and asked you to resolve it. The imagery is popular and pre-Buddhist. The message is doctrinal. So show how one carries the other. The first establish that motifs really are folk. Go to the railings and gateways of Bharat and Sanchi and you find carved in profusion. Then Yakshas and Yakshis, nature spirits from popular cult, standing on the pillars as guardians. The Salabanjika, the woman grasping the branch of a flowering tree, a fertility image far older than Buddhism. Naga serpent deities from village religion, lotus medallions filling every roundel, Puranagatta, the overflowing ways, elephants, lions, bulls, horses, makaras, then auspicious symbols like Srivatsa, Triratna, Swastika. None of this is doctrinally Buddhist. All of it was already there. And note that what is absent from these panels at Barhut and Sanchi Stupa, the Buddha himself is not shown in human form. Where he should stand, there is an empty throne, a pair of footprints, a parasol over nothing, a riderless horse leaving the palace, the Bodhi tree, the wheel state that as a fact about what the reliefs show and move on. Why the figure appears later and what changed is chapter three's question and is start there in full. So now show the four ways it is put to the Buddhist work. What are the four ways? And we have to put for Buddhist work. The Jatakas. What are the Jatakas? The single largest narrative content on these railings, the previous birth stories. The Jatakas, the single largest narrative content on these railings is the previous birth stories. Chadanta, the six-tusked elephant, the Mahakapi, the monkey king who makes a bridge of his own body, Vesantara, who gives away everything, Sama, who cares for his blind parents. Look at what those stories are, animal fables and folk tales in circulation independently of Buddhism, absorbed and relabeled as births of the Bodhisattvas. And look at what they teach: Dana, giving, Sila, conduct, Karuna, compassion, Tyaga, renunciation, the Paramitas delivered as a stories of a farmer could follow. The second one is absorption rather than displacement. The Yakshi is not banished from the Buddhist monument. She is carved onto the gateway bracket where she is unmistakably beautiful, unmistakably popular, and unmistakably subordinate. She holds up the gateway through which you enter the Buddha's precinct. The Naga is shown as a devotee. Muchalinda, the serpent, shelters. The Buddha is with his hood. This is a strategy. That is a strategy, and you should name it as one. Buddhism did not compete with popular religion for the same wall. It enclosed it. The local deity was retained, given a place, and assigned a lower rank. The third one is the folk symbol carrying doctrine. The lotus was an auspicious motif before it meant anything. On a stupa, it means purity rising unstained out of mud. The wheel was a solar and a royal emblem. Here it is the Dharma Chakra. The elephant is a fertility and royal animal. Here it is Maya's dream and the conception. And nothing new was invented. Existing images were given new load. And the fourth one, and this is the argument that ties the answer together. The audience. The stupa railing is at eye level on the outside. Along the path, the lay pilgrim walks. It is a public surface addressing a lay population that could not read Pali and would never read a sutta. Doctrine believed as scripture reaches monks. Doctrine delivered, doctrine delivered as a script as scriptures reaches monks. Doctrine delivered as a familiar animal fable carved where everyone walks, reaches everyone. So the folk motifs are not compromise or a dilution. They are the pedagogy. Early Buddhist stupa art is a teaching program in the visual vernacular of its audience, and the reason it successfully expounds Buddhist ideals is precisely that it did not invent a new visual language to do it. So one qualification to add, because this is true, it is true, and it will be noticed. What is that? The absorption ran both ways. Buddhism gained reach by taking in popular cult, and popular cult gained durability by being carved in stone on a monument that survived. Neither side was simply used by the other. So this is regarding the folk culture motives, etc., as far as Buddhism is concerned. Then we are moving to scene number three, that is who actually paid for it. Patronage correction here. So this scene owns no past question. It is the chapter's spine, and it corrects something almost every student believes. Ask who built the great stupa at Sanchi, and the answer come back Ashoka. This is a quarter of the fourth. That is a quarter of the fourth. So you have to read those two dates together. So Ashoka's contribution in the 3rd century BCE was a brick core, a mound enshrining relics, substantial, imperial, and contemporary, comparatively plain. Comes to the stone casing, the Vedika and the four great carved Toranas came roughly 2 centuries later. The closing centuries BCE in the Sunga and the Shatavahana period. 200 years separate the emperors mound from the art we go to Sanchi to see. So, and here is what makes it matter. The railings and gateways at Sanchi carry donor inscriptions, a very large number of them, recording who gave what. Read them, and the picture is not imperial at all. The donors are monks and nuns, giving individually and by name, merchants and householders, villages, whole guilds. One of the gateways recorded a gift from the ivory carvers of Vidisha, a craft guild paying for a monument in its regional capital's most important shrine. So these are the main modest gifts, many of them aggregated. So state the finding plainly. The emperor built the mound. Monks, nuns, traders, and craftsmen built the art. Three things follow, and each is worth a line in answer. On the imagery, this is why scene two's argument holds. A monument crowded fund by lay donors is a monument answering latest, that helps explain why the visual vocabulary of these monuments is rooted so deeply in popular and lay culture rather than being exclusively courtly. And comes to the economy, those inscriptions are economic history, named guilds, named towns, named professions, evidence of surplus in the hands of traders and artisans in the last centuries of BCE. The stupa is a record of who had money. And comes to women, the donor lists include a striking number of nuns and laywomen, giving it their own names independently without a male relative attached. That is one of the better pieces of evidence we have for female economic agency in early historic India. So, and it is carved on a railing. So, one line of honest calibration here is what? Royal and elite patronage was real and substantial too with Ashoka's core. The Shatavahana period, Torana's later royal grants. The point is not that kings were absent, it is that the standard story credits them with everything and the stone itself records otherwise. So, this is regarding Ashoka's stupa as far as Sanchis per and what we photograph the stone casing, carved gateways, funded largely by lay monastic donors, etc., villages, craftsmen, nuns, laywomen, etc. So this is regarding patronage correction. Then we are moving to next scene, that is why rock cut is a source. Why rock cut is a source. Here is the 2020 question that asked 10 marker question, 150 words. What is that question? The rock cut architecture represents one of the most important sources of our knowledge of early Indian art and history discuss. So you have to read that question again. The rock cut architecture represents one of the most important sources of our knowledge of early Indian art and history discuss. It does not ask you to describe about caves. It doesn't ask you to describe caves. It asks why they are a source. A candidate who writes a tour of Ajanta and Ellora has answered a different question at all. Give 5 channels of evidence and give the first two properly because they are the strongest and almost nobody states them. First one is survival. What is the survival and specifically what survives in negative? Early Indian structural architecture was built largely in brick and timber, and that is what is gone. Much of early India's structural architecture and its timber architecture above all has simply disappeared, but the rock cut hall was not built. It was excavated, cut into living rock which does not fall down. And the excavators working from the front inward copied the buildings they knew. The Chaitya Hall reproduced a timber barrel valued structure is stone. The Chaitya Hall reproduces a timber barrel vaulted structure in stone, ribbed walls imitating wooden rafters, beams and purlins carved where no beam is needed, facades facades reproducing the fronts of wooden halls. At Baja and Carle, actual wooden ribs were fitted into the stone vault, and some survive. So, rock cut architecture is a fossil of an architecture that no longer exists. It preserves in a medium that cannot perish the forms of one that entirely did. That single point is worth 2 sentences in the answer. Then moving to the second one, that is sects, 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 including one that vanished. The sects including one that vanished, and this is the sharpest evidentiary claim in the chapter. The Barabar and Nagarjuni caves in Bihar were excavated under Ashoka and Dasharatha in the 3rd century BCE, and several of them carry dedications to the Ajivikas by inscription, a major heterodox sect of the period, contemporary with Buddhism and Jainism, which afterwards disappeared almost without trace. So not every excavation the group is dedicated. The point is that the dedicated ones exist and are dated. So those caves and their dedicatory inscriptions are close to the only physical evidence of the Ajivikas we possess. So say what follows and say it in this form. The Barabar and Nagarjuni caves provide some of the most important surviving material and inscriptional evidence for the Ajivakas, a major religious tradition whose physical remains are otherwise exceptionally scarce. And at Ellora, Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain excavations sit at one site across some 4 centuries. 34 on the conventional count, which is direct evidence of religious coexistence rather than an inference about it. And the third one is inscriptions. The Deccan caves are covered in donor records, merchants, guilds, royal officials, monks, and notably Yavana donors. Greek named foreigners endowing Buddhist caves at Karle and Nasik. Those inscriptions give us trade, coinage, guild structure, titles, and the reach of foreign settlements. And at Udayagiri in Odisha, the Hathi Gumpha inscription of Karavela is effectively four prince. Odisha, the Hathi Gumpha inscription of Karavela is effectively our principal source for an entire dynasty. So the fourth one is location as evidence. Plot the Western Deccan caves on map. So Baja, Karle, Kondane, Konden, Junnar, Nasik, Kanheri, and they sit along the passes connecting the Konkan ports to the Deccan Plateau. They are not in wilderness, they are on the trade roads, and the monasteries served as way stations. The distribution of the caves maps the commerce of the period. So that is a historical inference you can draw from architecture alone. Then fifth one is painting. Ajanta preserves by far the most substantial surviving body of ancient Indian painting. Not the finest that ever existed, the most that is left. Everything else, place murals, the mainstream of the tradition is gone. Without Ajanta and the smaller survival bodies at Bagh and Sittanavasal, our knowledge of early Indian painting would be extraordinarily thin. So what you have to close with this, close with the qualification, because discuss invites one. So the sources are religious foundations, so they over represent monastic and donor society and tell us little directly about those who endowed nothing, like temple sculpture. They are evidence with an interest. You have to say so, and you have written about method rather than about caves. So for this question, what we have discussed so far, 2020 question, rock cut architecture as a source. We are taking we have taken 5 channels as source. That is first one survival, then sects, then inscriptions, then locations, and painting. We conclude with the monastic donor society, the qualification of the question invites. So rock cut architecture as a source has these 5 channels: as a source for survival, as a source for sex, as a source for inscriptions, as a source for location, distribution of maps, the commerce, as a source for paintings through Ajanta, Bagh, Sittanavasal caves. And this is regarding the rock cut architecture as a source. Then we are moving to sequence in stone. Now the sequence, we have to compress the 2 words first, because candidates confuse them instantly. That is a Chaitya Gruha. A Chaitya Gruha is a prayer hall, aspidal in plan, barrel vaulted, with a stupa standing at the apse, colonnaded aisles for circumambulation, and a horseshoe Chaitya window, the Gavaksha over the entrance admitting light into the stupa. So first we are going to discuss the Chaitya Gruha. What is Chaitya Gruha? Chaitya Gruha is a prayer hall in Buddhist. Aspidal in plan, apsidal in plan, barrel vaulted, with a stupa standing at the apse, colonnade aisles for circumambulation, and Harsusho Chaitya window, the Gavaksha over the entrance admitting light onto the stupa. This is regarding about Chaitya Gruha. Then we are moving to Vihara. Vihara is a residence. Vihara is a what? Residence. A square hall with monastic cells opening of the three sides. Later Viharas and add a shrine on the rear wall, and that addition is how the Vihara eventually becomes a temple. So now the sequence here is four stages. The first one is 3rd century BCE. Barabar, Nagarjuni, Bihar, the beginning. Ashokan and Dasharatha dedication to the Ajivikas. The Lomas Rishi facade imitates a thatched and timber hut front, and the interiors carry the extraordinary Mauryan mirror polish and granite. Then move to 2nd century BCE to 2nd century CE. In western Hinayana phase, Baja, Konden, Pitalkora, Chunnar, Nasik, Ajanta's earliest caves, culminating the Karle, the largest and the finest Chaitya hall in India, with its greatest facade of Mithuna couples and its surviving timber ribs. Stupas only, no Buddha image, which places this phase before chapter 3's transition. And we have to say this here, the same early horizon, because it is where it belongs. The Jain excavations at Udayagiri and Kandagiri in Odisha, under Karavela in roughly the 1st century BCE, demonstrate that rock cut patronage was never exclusively Buddhist, and it is the same site whose inscription, scene 3, called our principal source for a dynasty. Then comes to 5th century CE, Ajanta's second phase, some 30 excavations in a Harsusho George gave above the Vagora. This phase under Vakataka patronage in the reign of Harisena. Now Mahayana comes to Mahayana, the Buddha image everywhere, and the paintings Padmapani and Vajrapani in cave number 1, the Jataka cycles in cave number 17, UNESCO inscribed, named here, taught in chapter number 8, 6th to 10th centuries. What are the 6th to 10th centuries? The tradition passes to Hindu and Jain patrons. Ellora 34 excavations on the conventional count, Buddhist, then Hindu, the Jain culminating in the Kailasa, cave number 16 under the Rashtrakutas, not a cave but a complete temple carved downward out of this hillside with the enormous volume of rock removed and nothing added. Elephanta in Mumbai harbor, Shaiva with the great Trimurti, Badami and Aihole Chalukya. So we have to use one line to close the scene and hand off. That is, the rock cut tradition hands over to chapter 5. So say the overlap first. Because the transition was not a switch. The two traditions ran side by side for centuries. Ellora was still being excavated while the Pallavas were already building. But the direction of travel is unmistakable, and the Mahabalipuram, you can watch it and happen on one side. The Pallavas cutting rathas out of the boulders and then rising the shore temple stone by stone. From the structural building becomes a dominant story. Indian architecture stopped subtracting and started adding. So the sequence here, where each side belongs, we discussed, comes to Mauryan 3rd century BCE, Barabari Nagarjuna caves, and early historic 1st century BCE, that Udayagiri and Kandagiri under Karavela rock cut patronage. So never exclusively to Buddhist patronage, and then 2nd century BCE to 2nd century CE, comes under Western Deccan and Hinayana Buddhism time, that is Baja Konden, Junnar Nashik Karle. Here stupas only, no Buddha image, because this is comes under Hinayana. Then comes to Ajanta second phase, date 5th century CE, under this Vakataka under Harishena Mahayana Buddhism. In this time, the Buddha image and the paintings happened. Then comes to Hindu and Jain. This is comes under 6th to 10th century CE. Ellora, Elephanta, Badami, Aihole caves, Kailasa carved down. So Udayagiri and Kandagiri belongs to early historic origin, not to the 6th century phase. That is 1st century BCE. Chaitya against Vihara means Chaitya Gruha, apsidal barrel vaulted hall with a stupa at the apse. And against comes to Vihara, against square residential hall that later acquires a rare state. This is all regarding about the sequence regarding all these Mauryan early historic, Western Deccan, Hinayana, Ajanta second phase, Hindu and Jain, Udayagiri, Kandagiri. So then we are moving to next scene, that is still in use and just inscribed. So you have to close in the present tense answer, because this chapter has the freshest material in the whole marathon. Sarnath has been inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Sarnath has been inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The details are on screen. Sarnath, Sarnath is where the first sermon was delivered. Sarnath carries. The details are on. So Sarnath is where the first sermon was delivered, where the wheel that turns upon every railing in this chapter was first set tuning. It carries the Dhamek Stupa and the Ashokan line capital. Now precise about the capital, because this is where candidates get it wrong. Both of India's national symbols come of the same object. The four lines on the top of the capital are the state emblem of India. So the wheel on the abacus beneath them, the drum the lions stand on, is the dharma chakra that sits at the center of the national flag. Not a railing wheel, not a stupa medallion. The abacus of one pillar at Sarnath. So you have to note what that means for the chapter you have just heard. The visual vocabulary of the early Buddhist monument is the visual vocabulary of the Indian Republic, and the specific pieces of stones it was taken from the standing in a museum at the site whose inscription on your screen. This is the thing we are going to discuss about. And second one, the relics are still moving. In recent years, relics of Buddha have traveled abroad for public exposition, drawing very large number of devotees. And one some of those expositions, they have been accompanied by the relics of his disciples, Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. Mahamoggallana. So you have to keep the two provinces apart, because they are different objects with different histories. The Buddha relics that travel are Kapilavastu relics recovered from Piprava and held in the National Museum. The Sariputta Mahamoggallanna relics are Sanchis recovered from Stupa 3 taken in Britain in the 19th century. So written in the middle of the 20th century and re-enshrined at Sanchi, where they are the direct link back to the Sin 3 monument. That is not archaeology, that is 2000-year old practice and functioning. The third one is the state is now building on it. Heritage tourism investment is being extended across the Buddhist monastic landscape of the Northeast. In Arunachal, Sikkim, Assam, and Tripura, the excavation continues to extend the map, that is Kushan era complex at Jahanpora in Baramulla, with its stupas, apsidal chaityas, and viharas. Sits on the corridor that linked Kashmir to Gandhara. And here is the argument to close on here. Every other chapter in this part deals with monuments that are looked at. This one deals with monuments that are still doing the job they were built for. So, receiving pilgrims, holding relics, generating diplomacy, Buddhist heritage is India's most exportable cultural asset, precisely because the constituency for it is largely outside India, across Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. This is a conservation opportunity and conservation risk in the same sentence, and chapter 10 takes it up. So one pillar at Sarnath carries both. The lions on the emblem stood on its capital. The wheel on the flag was carved on the abacus they stood on. We did not choose national symbols and find